This became known as the law of retribution. You did to me, I should get to do to you. You slapped me, I should get to slap you. And for us, it's to slap you, right? Isn't that how we think of it? If you slap me, I don't get to slap you, and I might pull your hair, but see, we see it as the minimum. However, that's not the way it was intended. This law was actually the beginning of mercy, not the beginning of retaliation. Completely the opposite. The law was not intended to set a minimum for what I can do. It was a maximum of what I could do. I'm not allowed to pull your hair. All I get to do is slap you. Okay, as opposed to, we think of it as, I at least get to do this back. Now, here's how this worked. If one guy was injured, prior to the law, the whole tribe of people would be killed. You killed one of our guys, we're going to kill your whole village of men. So the law comes in to say that if one guy dies, only one guy dies over here. Okay? So it was the maximum, not the minimum. And even more than that, it was only the person who killed him who could be killed. It wasn't the whole village anymore. So it put a lid on what we could do to pay back. It limited our vengeance. It limited the paybacks that we could create for other people. Only the offender and only equal injury. You cut off my hand, only the guy who cut off my hand and only his same hand. That became the process. So rather than two hands, because that's what we want to do, or make it worse, then it became the lid, it became the limit. Second, this was a law and it never, ever, ever gave an individual the right to carry it out. It was carried out by communities. It was carried out by societies. So it was a group decision and it was a group activity. That kind of sounds weird, doesn't it? Hey, let's go find Johnny. Okay. Yeah, I like that. It was a community that made the decision. And in fact, it was a judge who would make the decision. You know how we have stuff now where they'll go, well, referencing Supreme Court case, you know, this versus that, da 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 da. Well, that's what this was. This was a law that a judge would say, now, Amy, you took Tom's goat. Therefore, based on this law, this is the punishment. Okay? It wasn't something that I got to decide as a citizen or a civilian. It was decided by the court in my community, and it became the standard for your favorite judge, whether it's Judge Judy, Judge Wagner, or whoever you like. Pick one. Okay? They would just reference the law. And as far as we know, it was never ever carried out. So one guy dies, the judge makes the decision, that guy over there should die. As far as we know, that guy never really suffered that fate. It was just said that publicly everybody knew he should die. Okay, now that's kind of weird. Why make a judgment if you're not going to carry it out? Well, it's bad enough that everybody knows. You know what they say, bad press is better than no press? Not necessarily. Because there are people that have been run through the press and have been found guilty, and then they can't go about getting a life. They can't go anywhere anymore because they get tagged or they get labeled as being a son who cuts off my hand or takes my goat. They could be found guilty on 5 things. I thought this was pretty interesting. Injury, pain, healing, loss of time, and indignity. We call those bodily harm, damages, hospitalization, loss of wages, pain, and suffering for the people.com. That's what we call that. Now, isn't it interesting? Okay? And these are the same things. If I back it up one. Injury, same thing. You hurt me, you cost me money, you didn't allow me to work, and you embarrassed me. Or you've affected the way people look at me. We're still suing people for the same things. Several thousand years later. That's why we have lawyers. Number 3, most of all, this law is often seen as the whole of the Old Testament, but it's not. I meet many people who tell me the Old Testament is the part of God that's about the rules and about relationship, and God is mad, and God's justice, and God's anger, and then Jesus showed up, and the second half of the book is about grace. But that's not true. That whole law is about grace. You messed up. You deserve to die, but we're only going to limit it. That's grace. And there's a lot of grace in the Old Testament. Adam and Eve should have been toast. Jonah was shown mercy for a while, and then did himself in. Moses, Noah, name your favorite story. It's all about grace. It's about people that did things that broke God's heart, and God still had patience and still had them in right relationship with them. The Old Testament is full of grace. It wasn't demonstrated the same as in the New Testament through the sacrifice of Christ. But there's a lot of grace in the Old Testament. actually teach then? He didn't teach an eye for an eye. He just quoted it. Okay, so what did he teach? He taught this. Sooner or later, you're going to get hacked off. It's true. Okay, whether you're single, married, don't care what color you are, what size or shape you are, sooner or later you're going to get offended. Because it's life. And particularly in America, where I'm allowed to say whatever I think. Because I have the freedom of speech. Now remember last week, one of the little things was have a hallelujah praise Jesus party, because that's just not very likely anymore. And what Jesus taught was that retaliation is not acceptable. It's not acceptable. That's what he taught. This is where we get the folks that are from that little branch of the family tree that practice pacifism. Complete, no retaliation at all. But it's more than that. If you are a growing follower of Christ, I will guarantee you that this section of this text will forever be a struggle for you. Because if you're really serious about becoming like Jesus, it's not just about not retaliating. Jesus introduced something called no resentment. He did away with this law of limited vengeance. That's what they called it. And he replaced it with a spirit of no resentment. Jesus was asked, where's your kingdom? Is your kingdom over here? Is your kingdom over there? And he said, hey, if my kingdom was over here, over there, I would show it to you. But my kingdom is where? In the hearts of men. Everything about Jesus is about your heart. It's a spiritual thing. And so what he's teaching is it's not just enough to not go cut Amy's hand off. I can't even resent Amy. It's a new way of thinking. It's a new spirit. A spirit of non-resentment. That is a huge change from you have every right to go do that, to I'm not even going to resent that person. That is a huge stretch. You've heard it said, but I'm telling you, this is heaven's perspective. That is a far stretch for this guy. Far stretch. In the Jewish law, to be struck with the back of your hand, the back of the hand, was twice as insulting as to be hit with the flat of your hand. I'm going to ask Ralph to come over because Ralph's like huge. Everybody knows Ralph is a third-degree black belt, right? You'll stand right there and face me. Some of you like they do. Okay, thank you. Okay, in the Jewish world, everything that they talked to, their right hand represented their power. It represented their wealth, their position, their possessions. That's why in a marriage ceremony we have the bride and groom face each other and join right hands. It means they're bringing their very best to each other. That's where that comes from. And so in the Jewish world, if I loved this guy, I would shake hands with him like this. But if I didn't, then I would ignore him. And so when I show him the palm of my hand, or greet him with the palm of my hand, I'm giving him value. In the Jewish world, to be slapped is one thing, but to be slapped with the back of your hand was twice as insulting, because it's representing I'm showing you none of my respect. I'm showing you none. So if a Jewish man was going to slap this man, he would slap him this way. He would never use his left hand. He would never use the left hand because there's no strength. The right hand represents your strength. So he would slap him this way. So what did Jesus say, Ralph? To do what? Turn the other cheek. Now the only way I can slap him from here is to show him value as a human being. Is to acknowledge his God-created value. And so Jesus is trying to say, you don't even have to hit him back to make a statement. All you have to say is, nah, I ain't doing that again. Not until you acknowledge that I'm important. That's all Jesus is saying. And so you can go have a seat. You're awesome. Way to go. Amen.